Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to be here before you this evening to moderate a discussion on vaccination. Is there a light at the end of tunnel? Now, this catchy name has been given by Dr. Rajadhar, a friend who is also one of the best speakers that I know. And this is an ambitious webinar that he has planned, being a coordinator of the academic wing of Indian Chess Society. Before I go on to the webinar, I would like to proudly say something about the society of which I am an executive member. Indian Chess Society was formed in 1980, and ever since it has grown leaps and bounds. And now we have about 3,000 members. I could be wrong on that number, but the number is pretty large. We are not only organizing annual conference and bonanza or dinners or something. We are actually, the society has gone into the research as well as promoting young talent. There are zonal uh, activities which are regularly are functioning. We are funding research grants. We are also funding young talent to go abroad for uh, attending conferences and presenting papers. So I would, those who are not members, chess physicians, I would actually urge you to join this society to promote. And this is absolutely an academic society. And currently, the president is Dr. DJ Christopher, and the secretary is Dr. Rajesh Swarnkar. They are the driving force. And at the back is Dr. Samaria, who has been an all-time power behind this. So this was about the society, my society that I work for. And now to the subject. And it's my privilege to introduce uh, my colleague, my friend, Dr. Guleria. Actually, it doesn't need an introduction. I don't have anything written, but I can talk about pages about him. He is director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences and one of the senior most professor of pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, a Padma Shri and also a BC Roy awardee with more than 400 publication, and aptly he is also spoken as the top doctor of this country, rightly so, a great physician, a great pulmonologist, a great researcher, and also now in the COVID time, he is a great planner. And he is the one, along with the other specialists, he is spearheading the COVID. And everyone knows that whenever he is on television, everybody glues to the TV, including myself. So I'm really thankful. And I had the fortune of working with him for 3 decades, and you can understand how much I would have learned from him all these years. So without wasting much time, Dr. Guleria is going to give us an overview of vaccination, and to my mind, he is the best person in the world today to talk about it. And then after that, I'll be introducing my other panelists who are actually out of this world, and we hope to have a meaningful discussion, and then we'll talk about uh, rest of the intricacies of vaccination. Professor Guleria, all is yours. Please share your slides and give us your words of wisdom.
Thank you very much. At the onset, I'd like to thank Dr. Khilani for his kind words and the Indian Chess Society for inviting me to give this talk. I hope my slides are visible.
Yes, they are.
So I'll be giving an overview of COVID-19 vaccine, and I know that there are a number of experts who are present in the panel who, for them, this talk may be a little superfluous, but I think for the audience it would be useful. So when we look at the vaccine, this article really tried to put it in a frame that a weapon to win the war. And this is what was said in the US when the shots of COVID-19 vaccines were being rolled out there. But we must remember that COVID-19 has been widely touted as the most effective public health measure to end the pandemic. Vaccines are, I think, one of those major research tools or public health measures which have really made a huge difference as far as infectious disease is concerned. In 1796, Edward Jenner, at that point in time, used cowpox lesion material, and using that, he started the whole process of inoculation or vaccination as far as smallpox was concerned. But inoculation, as it was known at that point in time, had been known even for centuries before that. If you look at old Indian literature and literature from Bengal, there was inoculation being done as a part of treatment or as a part of prevention of infectious diseases. As far as COVID-19 is concerned, the first vaccine has received authorization in Russia, US, UK, Canada, UAE, and now, of course, in many countries in Europe. So we are actually seeing a very rapidly changing scenario as far as COVID-19 vaccine is concerned. And there is widespread optimism that this is the beginning of the end, as was said by Dr. Khilani, that is it the end of the tunnel? And this is something that we need to we need to discuss. So I'll be discussing what are the COVID-19 vaccine, the current evidence, major challenges that we have, India's planning and preparedness, and then finally a slide to really look at will vaccination end the COVID-19 pandemic. So like I said, they're the most promising approach currently because COVID-19, we don't have a definite antiviral drug. This is something very fascinating. We have so many vaccines just around the corner, but we still don't have an effective antiviral drug as far as COVID-19 is concerned. There are over 52 candidate vaccines which are in human trials and over 150 are in preclinical trials, and various vaccine platforms are being used. Whenever we look at a vaccine design, there are three very important issues that one looks at: the selection of the antigen, selection of the platform, and the route and the dosing that needs to be given as far as the vaccine is concerned. So when we look at COVID-19, we have the S protein, the spike protein, the N protein, the matrix protein, and the envelope protein. But it's been shown that only antibodies directed against the S protein, the spike protein, can neutralize and prevent infection. And therefore, all vaccines in development include a portion of the S protein when it comes to the selection of an antigen. The second is selection of vaccine platform. And by and large, now, broadly speaking, there are some other variants. We have 6 vaccine platforms: the live attenuated virus vaccine, the recombinant viral vector vaccine, inactivated or killed virus vaccine, the protein subunits, the VLP, the virus-like particles, and the nucleic acid RNA and messenger RNA-based vaccines. So these are the platforms that we have, and this is basically the platform that we use. And the third important thing is the route and regimens. This also is an integral part of any vaccine strategy. It's important for mucosal pathogens, especially those that affect the respiratory tract, because we would like to have a mucosal immunity. It's also important when we are looking at protection which requires both neutralizing antibodies and also innate and adaptive cellular immunity. So you want that the route should be such that it incites both good amount of neutralizing antibodies, but also gives a good cellular immunity. This is a cartoon which appeared many months ago in Nature, again trying to show the vaccine platform that I have, the weakened or vaccine, the inactivated virus, which can also be used as a vaccine, the nucleic acid vaccine, like I said, the DNA and the RNA vaccine, which then incite the host cell to produce the virus proteins, which lead to production of antibodies. The viral vector vaccines, which can be replicating viral vector or non-replicating, and the protein-based vaccine, which can be protein subunits or the VLPs. So if you look at the global landscape, there are around 203 candidates in preclinical stage, 58 candidates in clinical trials, and in all of those that I've shown, there are some or the other vaccines which are vaccine platforms which are being used as far as developing a COVID-19 vaccine is concerned. Never before, I think in the history, have we ever had so many platforms and so many novel platforms being looked at for one virus, and with so much of research being done. This really shows how technology has advanced and the capacity that we have now for doing collaborative research across the globe. If you look at the Indian landscape, there are 8 vaccine products which are being looked at. We have Covishield, which looks at the ChAdOx, the chimpanzee adenovirus, which is basically with AstraZeneca, and phase 3 trials are over, and I think the data is being collated. We have Covaxin, which is the Bharat Biotech vaccine with ICMR. Again, phase 3 studies are about to be over. The Zydus Cadila vaccine, the Zyco VD, which is a DNA vaccine. The Sputnik vaccine, which is by Dr. Reddy's laboratory, and Gamaleya from Russia. And here, phase 3 studies are starting. Then we have other vaccine candidates which are being looked at. For example, there is a vaccine with Serum Institute is collaborating with Novavax for phase 3 trials under consideration. We have a recombinant protein antigen-based vaccine also being looked at by Biologicals E Limited Hyderabad, and then other vaccine candidates, including the HGCO19 and the inactivated rabies vector platform. So there are a large number of vaccine candidates being looked at in India, and I think this is something that we need to be proud of. India was very well known for manufacturing vaccine, but now the R&D for vaccine has really come to its matured in India, and we have now so many vaccine candidates being looked at for COVID-19, and this is something which can be even done for other infections if a vaccine is needed for them using the same platform. Briefly, we have what is known as the nucleic acid vaccine. This is a very new type of vaccine that uses fragments of messenger RNA or DNA to produce an adaptive immune response to the host cells, and this produces copies of the target antigen. Now, this is the first time that a nucleic acid vaccine has actually been approved. There have been research in the past for looking at nucleic acid vaccines for various other infections, including influenza and even for Ebola. But this is the first time that it has actually got approval as far as use in humans is concerned. This elicits both an antibody and a cytotoxic T lymphocytic response. It can be scaled up and can be produced quickly, as we've seen both as far as the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine is concerned. It is expensive and a booster dose is usually needed, and most data suggest that it has more than 90% efficacy. Then we have the viral vector vaccine, which uses modified non-coronaviruses, the adenoviruses that are used. The chimpanzee adenovirus is used as far as the AstraZeneca vaccine is concerned. The other, the vaccine, which is the Russian one, uses adeno vaccine, which is of human origin. And then we have the vesicular stomatitis virus, which is basically a veterinary virus. And this is used, and this platform is used for expressing the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And this also elicits both an antibody and a cytotoxic T lymphocytic response. It is safe, but there is some issues as far as safety among immunocompromised patients is concerned, but not much signals as of now. And the host immunity to viral vector may reduce the vaccine efficacy, because if you're using an adenovirus, which is of human origin, if there is host immunity to that immunovirus, which is being used as a vector, then that may actually affect the efficacy of the vaccine. It's possible that you may have a single dose, and this can also be produced quickly. And we have a large number of companies which are exploring this viral vector vaccine. We have the traditional inactivated vaccine, which we use for hepatitis, influenza, polio, and rabies. And this uses a killed version of the virus to generate immunity. It elicits neutralizing antibodies without a cell-mediated response, but can safely be given to immunocompromised patients. And you will need a booster dose as far as this virus is concerned, this vaccine is concerned. And there are various companies, especially from China, which are looking at inactivated vaccine candidates. The protein-based vaccine uses a recombinant viral protein to induce an immune response. This elicits neutralizing antibodies without cell-mediated response. Again, can safely be given to immunocompromised patients. And this is again a proven technology which has already been used in many diseases like hepatitis B, HPV, pertussis, and herpes zoster. And again, a booster is likely to be likely needed. And we have again companies like Sanofi, GSK, and others which are looking at developing a protein-based vaccine using this platform. So if we look at this data, and this is a little old data from 4th of December, we have types of vaccine. We have the virus vaccine, the live attenuated, and the inactivated. Many trials going on from preclinical phase 1 to phase 3. We have the viral vector vaccines. Again, number of trials going on. The nucleic acid, the DNA, and the RNA vaccines. Now this number has gone on to 2 because Moderna has also got the licensing. And then we have the protein-based vaccine, the protein subunits, and the VLP. So I think this is a very fascinating and I would say encouraging time for vaccine experts, because this really shows the amount of work that has been done in less than a year in producing so many vaccines using so many platforms, and they have progressed so rapidly. So that question always comes that are we really using shortcuts as far as vaccine research is concerned? Now, normally a vaccine that we make undergoes through what is known as the initial preclinical work, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then the licensing work. But this usually takes years. And that's because of the fact that once this basic research is done, one looks at the data, one then looks for funding and then goes on to phase 1 studies, which is the first trials in human, and then based on the data again moves on forward. What COVID-19 has done is it has really made us work in parallel rather than in sequence. And this has led to a lot of investment by the manufacturers, by various governments, and therefore many of these stages have actually been done simultaneously. So we had a very quick development of the candidates, which was done based on the platform, which was already being researched thanks to a lot of work being done on Ebola for the MERS coronavirus, and some work even as far as SARS was concerned. And then very aggressively, we moved on to clinical development, looking at safety, dose selection, safety and efficacy, and simultaneously getting regulatory approvals. But while this was being done, many manufacturers already started developing and making the vaccine, and therefore it was stockpiling was already done, and this allowed the vaccine to be rolled out just within a few days of getting the regulatory approval. So I think there was a lot of work done to really make sure that all the red tapeism was taken care of, but really no compromise as far as safety and efficacy of the vaccine was done at any stage. So if you look at the landscape for COVID-19 candidates, this is 10th December, large number of vaccines. We have Covaxin, Covishield. Then we have the Sputnik, which is in collaboration with Dr. Reddy's laboratory, COVAX, with Serum Institute of India. And then we have other vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine, which has now been approved in various countries. And then we have Cadila, which is also moving forward. And of course, like I said, the Serum Institute is also looking at a new platform and a new vaccine candidate. So currently, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, along with Serum Institute of India, is the most likely vaccine which we will have in early part of next year, probably in January. Bharat Biotech will follow subsequently, and then we will have the Zydus Cadila vaccine also. So I would say that by the middle of next year, we may have almost 2 or 3 vaccines available in India, and that will be a big challenge to decide which is the one that we should give to which group, and how do we really distribute vaccines when we are really having more than one vaccine available in our country. So what do COVID-19 vaccine trial tell us, and why do we do them? So we, like I said, we do preclinical studies in animal and primates. Then we really look at a small number, which is the phase 1 trial, to perform dose ranging and safety studies. We go on to phase 2 trials, which look at immunogenicity and also safety in several hundred participants. And phase 3 usually has a large number, more than 10,000. In most studies, it's been usually 30 to 40,000 participants, which look at the efficacy of the vaccine in preventing laboratory confirmed infection, and also critically evaluate safety in a larger number of patients. So then the question comes, what should be the vaccine efficacy for a COVID-19 vaccine to be licensed? And this is something which WHO and the US FDA has looked at, that to look at vaccine efficacy, what was said by the WHO is that it should have minimal efficacy criteria for license should be that the vaccine efficacy should be at least 50%. And if you look at the 95% confidence interval, that means the lower limit would be 30% or more. So it was a very broad efficacy that was suggested by WHO. But if you look at the current data, most vaccines actually far exceed this cutoff and are having at least 60 to 70% or over 90% efficacy as far as the current data is concerned. Number of studies, this is the study for the Chadox virus from AstraZeneca with data from Brazil, South Africa, and UK. And this looked at 2 IM doses 28 days apart. And they did not have significant degree of serious side effects. Fever, headache, and fatigue were seen in about 8% of patients. But interestingly, what they found was that in participants who received a low dose, half dose in the beginning, followed by the full dose, the efficacy was 90%, as compared to those who received 2 standard doses, where the efficacy was around 62.1%. So this was an interesting observation. And therefore, this is something that is being looked at, that those, and they had also some additional data from participants who received half dose and second full booster dose, that they had fewer asymptomatic SARS-CoV infection than the control group. And this is one study which also suggested that this vaccine could help in reducing transmission. We have the Pfizer vaccine, the limitation being that it needs to be stored at -70 degrees. But again, this paper suggested that 2 doses of this mRNA-based vaccine was safe over a median of 2 months and provided 95% protection against symptomatic COVID-19 in persons 16 years of age or older. So this data was also encouraging. A large number of subjects were used in phase 3, more than 35,000, and adverse effects were usually not that severe: fever, fatigue, chills, and headaches. Then Moderna published its data in November, which shows that, again, about using 30,000 participants, they were able to show that the vaccine efficacy against COVID-19 was 94%, and vaccine efficacy against severe disease was 100%. So again, there was very encouraging data as far as this messenger RNA vaccine was concerned. And therefore, on the 19th of December, the US CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice actually gave the green signal to Moderna to start to roll out the vaccine. And this is now being provided in the United States. The US is now using both Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine as part of its vaccine strategy. The Sputnik vaccine, again, this is, like I said, using an adenoviral vector vaccine. It uses 2 different adenoviruses, AD26 for the first dose and AD5 for the second dose 20 days later. And again, we need more data because the initial data was using a very small sample size. But now with Dr. Reddy's laboratory tying up with the Russian group, we would get robust data in the coming months. Then we have data which has looked at the recombinant spike protein nanoparticle vaccine using trimeric, the spike glycoproteins, and potent matrix M1 adjuvant. And again, data does suggest that this is also something which would be very useful. They've found that this vaccine also has high binding neutralizing responses comparable to those in convalescent plasma from hospitalized COVID-19 patients. And again, the side effects were not that severe. The Chinese vaccine, this article in Nature actually showed that Arab nations are actually now giving the Chinese COVID vaccine despite lack of public data. And many of us are aware that many individuals who are in the United Arab Emirates and in Bahrain for the last few months actually have got this Chinese vaccine, and they claim that the efficacy is 86%. But we need really more data to be able to say how effective this vaccine from China is. But what are the major concerns and future challenges when we come to vaccine? First is that most COVID-19 vaccines are injectable, and while they elicit systemic immune response, mucosal response in upper respiratory tract may be absent. Remember, this virus enters through the upper respiratory tract, and therefore there is a big suggestion that we should try and see whether a nasal live attenuated virus may be useful, and this vaccine is being looked at in preclinical stages. Then the whole issue which was discussed in the past also, the possibility of enhancement of severity of disease following vaccination. This was seen in the past with various other vaccines, and that's why this became a big issue, because even in the early stage of vaccination with coronaviruses, this was a possibility. But this has not been observed in preclinical or clinical studies so far, and therefore if you have a good neutralizing antibody production, then vaccine-enhanced side effects are less likely to be there. And currently, as far as the data is concerned, of these the phase 3 trials, we haven't got any signal to suggest that there is enhancement of severity following vaccination. Then the current issue is duration of protection from vaccine and the need for repeat vaccination. This is a tough question, and I think we don't have enough data right now. long-term data will be required to see what is the protection and how long does these vaccine provide us protection. Then is the adverse effects of vaccination in population whom the vaccine has not been trialed, and especially in a large number of people, especially those who may not have come into the phase 3 trials. And what should we do as far as this group is concerned? I think we will need to observe the individuals even after vaccination to look for rare or uncommon side effects. As far as pregnant women and young children are concerned, the vaccine is currently not approved by regulators for this group, and we will have to have studies in children. And I know that vaccine trials have started in children before we can say that they can be safely given to children or pregnant women. Long-term adverse effects, like I think we don't have enough data, and there is a lot of concern, especially when novel platforms are being used. But I think there is enough animal data to suggest that the cause of concern may not be that much, but we need follow-up data before we can say that there are no long-term adverse effects. One thing that is going to come up, and this is going to be a big challenge, that once we have an effective COVID-19 vaccine that has been approved, it will be logistically and ethically challenging to conduct trials which are placebo-controlled. So, and this is what is happening even with the Bharat Biotech vaccine study which is going on. Because if you're going to do a placebo-controlled trial subsequently and you have a vaccine which has been approved, a lot of subjects are going to argue, and the ethics committee will argue that then your control arm cannot be placebo-controlled. It should be the vaccine which has been approved. And therefore, we will have to define correlates of protection. Studies can identify an association between antibody titers and vaccine efficacy, and it may be possible to license vaccine based on achievement of these serological benchmarks. And when there are no head-to-head comparison between these various vaccines which are coming out, and therefore it's going to be very difficult for us to say which vaccine is superior as compared to the other, or which vaccine would be useful in a particular subset of group patients, whether it's the elderly or with comorbidities. I think the next year is going to be very interesting in this field and will provide us some more data. The challenge, of course, as far as the world is concerned, the world has never before needed to implement mass immunization for its entire adult population. This is financial, logistics, and social challenges. And I think this is something that is going to be very, very challenging, especially when we start looking at continents like Africa and even in Southeast Asia. And therefore, it has to be some sort of uniformity as far as vaccination is concerned. We are having a lot of vaccine nationalism, and a lot of countries have ordered or pre-booked vaccines which are coming out from manufacturers, whereas continents like Africa are way behind. There is no real vaccine program at all in any country in Africa. So the pandemic will really be over when it's under control globally. And that's why international initiatives like the one that WHO and Gavi has started as COVAX facility is very important to ensure equitable distribution of vaccine worldwide. However, COVAX has only secured 400 million of the 2 billion doses it needs to guarantee that 20% of the population of participating low and middle income countries have access to the vaccine in 2021. And like I said, the EU, UK, USA and Canada have already made deals with the manufacturers to buy more than 50% of the doses expected. And this number has actually gone up now. And therefore, we'll have very few doses which could be available for the global population. This covers only 14% of the global population. The remaining population will need to have some degree of vaccine equity if we really want to get over this pandemic. Then the other important issue becomes vaccine delivery and distribution. Remember, vaccination, not vaccines, prevent infection and save lives. And there has been a lot of infodemic and sort of information going about vaccine safety, about its side effects. And it's something, it's not new. This is basically a painting which was done way back in 1802 when cowpox was being given as a vaccine for smallpox. And again, you can see that this is a lady being vaccinated, and those who are getting vaccinated are being shown to have cow heads coming out from various parts of their body. This was the type of fear that people even had way back in 1802 as far as vaccination was concerned. So now with social media even becoming more active, this is something which is going to be a big challenge. We have other challenges like who should receive the vaccine, what is the high priority group, and then various issues of maintaining the cold chain, immunization centers with facilities for central monitoring, and public health measures. But ultimately, until sufficient quantity of vaccine are manufactured for universal distribution, deployment of limited vaccine supply has to be equitable and efficient. And then when we start looking at this, we start looking at what is the potential endpoint for an efficacious vaccine. Are we looking at to prevent infection? That would be ideal. Or are we looking at to prevent disease, basically to prevent hospital admissions, prevent intensive care admissions, or prevent deaths? And ultimately, are we also being able to prevent transmission? So it's important that when we look at a vaccine, we need to see what exactly is it going to be able to do for us when it comes to these endpoints. Finally, coming to India's strategy and preparedness, on the 7th of August, the NECVAC was constituted. This is a national expert group on vaccination administration for COVID-19. This was under the chair of Member Health Niti Aayog, Dr. Paul, and Secretary Health and Family Welfare, Shri Rajesh Bhushanji. Many of us, including myself, we are members of this NECVAC, and it has representations of relevant ministries, state government, and technical experts. And it provides guidance on prioritization of population groups, procurement and inventory management, vaccine selection, and vaccine delivery and tracking mechanism. And we've had multiple meetings, more than 10 meetings since August, to really thrash out a lot of things. A lot of subcommittees have been formed, and a lot of aggressive work has been done as far as NECVAC is concerned. So the COVID-19 vaccine strategy has been formulated. Most vaccine candidates follow a 2-dose schedule. 1 and 3-dose schedule are also there, but that is currently not being rolled out. Vaccines are developed using multiple platforms, and these are not interchangeable. So we need to be careful that we use the same vaccine for the first and the second dose. And therefore, a beneficiary must complete vaccination schedules using the same vaccine product. And as far as the vaccine storage is concerned, using the Universal Immunization Program vaccine platform, we would be able to have a 2 to 8 degrees centigrade as far as the storage temperature is concerned. And rollout of vaccine would be done using the election model. So in phase 1, approximately 30 crore population would be vaccinated. Healthcare workers would be approximately 1 crore. Frontline worker would be around 2 crore. And then we have the prioritized age group. The first age group is everyone who is older than 50 years. So anyone above the age of 50 years with or without comorbidities would be vaccinated. And then we have this tricky group, less than 50 years with associated comorbidities. This group would be around 26 crore. We have this, I chair a committee where we're trying to come out with categorization of who should be prioritized, who is less than 50 years and has comorbidities. So we've had another meeting. We had one meeting now today also. We've had 3 meetings where we try to form a grid, whether it's renal disease, diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases, or persons with disability. How do you classify them to say that this person who is less than 50 years of age is a high risk and therefore should also be vaccinated in phase 1? This is a modality which is still work in progress. Hopefully by this week, we will have the framework ready. The health worker category is grouped in 9 categories, and this is just to give you an overview of the health worker categories, from the frontline health workers, nurses and supervisors, medical officers, paramedical staff, support staff, and students all would come into the health worker category. Similarly, the frontline category includes those who are from various departments of Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, state government, and this would be covered by district administration and not by the central ministries. What is being done is also a digital platform for COVID-19 vaccine delivery has been created, known as CoWIN, which looks at COVID-19 vaccine distribution and management system. First end-to-end system across the world has been created. Electronic beneficiary registration is done, and there is an automatic beneficiary session allocation, and this is integrated to Aadhaar. And along with that, it also looks at the supply chain, whether it's the cold chain point, temperature logger, or looking at the EVIN users. And this works on as the NECVAC being the overarching committee, followed by state level, district level, and block level groups, which really work to make sure that the governance and coordination mechanism is in place. And the CoWIN digital platform actually works by looking at a CoWIN mobile app. It looks at temperature logger, all of this is fed into a CoWIN dashboard, and therefore the data is actually fed online to really see what is happening. It's a real-time visibility, and the beneficiaries also get are tracked. They get a SMS message and they're told when the vaccination session is scheduled, and subsequent follow-up management for any side effects is also done. So this is a complex chart which tries to show how the CoWIN vaccine delivery management system would work, and from the manufacturer right up to the beneficiary vaccination, session allocation, and beneficiary registration. And then there is the whole issue of how to the role of staff at vaccination site. That has also been developed. Vaccination officer 1, 2. What is the role of vaccine officer 3 and 4? This is very much like what is done as far as the election model is concerned. And then we have various sites which would have been selected for different priority group. It would be the session site for healthcare workers. It would be government health facility and PHC level and above. For the frontline workers, what would be site for vaccination? And for the prioritized group, what would be site of vaccination? And this has already been done. So a whole flow chart has been created from the entry point to monitoring for any side effects for 30 minutes, and then the individual being asked to leave that site. And anaphylaxis kits have been put up at each site, and the contents of this have been also displayed, and training has also been done to all the vaccinators and the health personnel at that site in terms of managing any severe side effects. And very happy to state that today we had the dry run which was done in 4 states as far as the corona vaccine rollout is concerned. So that will give us a lot of additional information in terms of really optimizing our vaccine delivery platform and how to go about, because it's a huge task. Even if we have to vaccinate 30 crore individuals, that means we need to give 60 crore doses. So finally, will the COVID-19 vaccine end the pandemic? So I think COVID-19 vaccine development is one of the great achievements of modern medicine. I think we should never go away from the fact that this is remarkable. None of us actually even sort of expected this to happen in the beginning of this year. But this is only the first step in what has to be a global mass immunization campaign. And like I keep saying, that it has to be done at a global level. We are now a small village, and therefore it's very important that vaccination is done at a global level, because people travel, as we've seen with the variant strain from UK, it's gone all across the world. Therefore, it will be a few years before the vaccine we can say that the virus can be brought under control. And equitable global distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine is imperative, and this is something we really need to work on. Till then, public health measures have to be in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This will probably continue well into next year, because I don't think we will have a sufficient mass of people vaccinated even by the middle or end of next year to say that we have achieved good vaccination globally, to say that the pandemic is over. But yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and if once the vaccination gets rolled out, we will start seeing decreasing number of cases, decreasing number of mortality, and hopefully moving towards a good new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. I can only keep clapping on your every lecture. It was a masterly presentation, starting from basics up to the end to the village. You have actually explained everything, and in fact, a lot of questions which I had framed to ask my panelists have been answered by you. But nevertheless, we'll indulge into a panel discussion and would answer questions. I was searching the Google, and I realized that almost 40 countries have started vaccinating their population, starting from UK, North America to Belgium, even Croatia, Cyprus, Greece, Hungary. And everybody is asking, why India, when there will be vaccine, when there will be a vaccine. Now that vaccine seems to be in the sight, there are several questions. You know, even doctors and non-doctors keep asking Pfizer vaccine, Moderna vaccine, Covaxin. And one of the questions which comes to anybody's mind, will I have a choice? If I have all the things in my platter like in a dinner table, which one I pick it up? Is it safe for me? Will it give me immunity? Is it long term? It will give me a benefit to it? how frequently it will be required, and to add to the confusion, the new mutated viruses from UK and South Africa has further created doubts in our minds whether this vaccine will be useful or vaccine will have to be repeated as we do in the influenza, how frequently it will be repeated. So there are a lot of intricacies of this. Dr. Guleria has clarified so many things. But we have an amazing panel to clarify further points, and that includes Dr. Gagandeep Kang, who is a professor of gastrointestinal sciences at iconic Christian Medical College, Vellore. She has a huge biodata with me, which I have, but in the interest of time, I am not narrating it. Everyone knows that she has worked on rotaviruses. She's an authority in her own right. So we'll listen to her. Everybody knows Dr. Dhruv Chaudhary. He is a senior professor and head of Department of Pulmonary Critical Care Medicine. Finest physician, pulmonologist, researcher, and now he is a public health person also because he is spearheading the COVID management in Haryana and also is a co-PI for a Covaxin trial. Dr. Samiran Panda is very kind to be with us today. He is a trained epidemiologist. He also has had a stint at iconic Christian Medical College, and he is currently the director and scientist at ICMR National AIDS Research Center. And finally, Dr. Sanjay Rai, my friend. He is a professor, Center of Community Medicine. I'm not reading anybody's biodata, but he is the PI for Covaxin trial. So he is the man who is actually conducting it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have an amazing, amazing panel. So first I come to Dr. Professor Gagandeep Kang. Dr. Gagandeep, mankind all over the world is anxiously was waiting. And there were a lot of intricacies. You know, when we were reading in MBBS, the book, the iconic book of Park, killed vaccine, live attenuated vaccine, now they say mRNA vaccine. So can you just tell us about the type of vaccines in brief and their efficacy and intricacies? Dr. Gagandeep, please. Please unmute yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Khilnani. It's a pleasure to be here. I basically divide vaccines into two types. One is the vaccines where you actually give the protein to which you want to induce an immune response, or vaccines where you send in the message that tells the body how to make the vaccines. So whether we look at the vaccines that were so elegantly described by Dr. Guleria, the live attenuated vaccines, the inactivated vaccines, the VLPs, recombinant proteins, all of those are vaccines where we provide the protein and ask the body to respond to the protein. If we look at the viral vectored vaccines, whether replicating or non-replicating viruses, or we look at mRNA or DNA vaccines, those are vaccines where we are sending in the message and asking the body to make the protein and then make an immune response to the protein that we ourselves have produced. That's the basic description of all the platforms that exist at the moment. There is, of course, an advantage to being able to give just proteins instead of the entire virus, and those relate really to safety and the ability to better tailor the immune response. Dr. Guleria had pointed out the concerns that we had early on about safety with the prospect of either antibody-dependent enhancement or vaccine-associated enhanced respiratory disease. Those were associated really with having vaccines that were largely inactivated vaccines.
All right. So thank you very much. You were really very brief. I expected you a little longer response from you, but very expertly you have responded to that and clarified a lot of things. Dr. Dhruv, can you unmute yourself, please? So I come to Dr. Dhruv. We have been reading papers. Recently, there was a paper in New England Journal of Medicine that healthcare workers who had either infection or had antibodies in their blood, and they followed them up for a period of 6 months, and there are only 2 cases out of 1,100 cases of healthcare workers who developed only asymptomatic COVID, as compared to the healthcare workers who did not have, and that number was 232 cases. So antibodies so far has been taken as a surrogate of protection or immunity against COVID. So Dr. Dhruv, is that the only thing which is important? Please enlighten us.
Sir, if you really look at it, thank you very much, first of all, the ICS for inviting and giving a chance to interact. As Dr. Guleria has also shown it, that he very briefly touched about innate and adaptive immunity. I think when you are doing a vaccination or whenever you have an infection, I think we look at when you look at an adaptive immunization or adaptive immunity, we are not only looking at the immunoglobulins, but we need to look at the T cells also. So the classical description which have been taught to us at an undergraduate level are that because of infections, and especially when you do a vaccination, you have a primary immune responses, and then you try to boost it as a secondary immune responses when you give a booster dose or when you are already sensitized to it. Therefore, immunoglobulins definitely is one criteria which we really look at it. But body has other different mechanisms by means of which it can look at it. Memory B cells, I said, are responsible for it. And then along with it, now we are realizing that the T cell is also playing a very important role in it, in particular cell-mediated immunity or the intracellular organisms. Therefore, B cell is one component, T cell is another component, and then along with the T cell with their interaction with B cell, and then T cell subsequently having a natural killer cells. So there is a multiple other issues which are there. Therefore, antibodies, yes, are an important component which act as the primary for us, but presence of sensitized memory B cells, T cells, and the natural killer cell activity also play a very important role in managing the infections.
So, Dr. Dhruv, a lot of antibody tests are available in India. All the private laboratories are testing. But when you look at the research papers coming from West, they talk about spike protein antibodies, nucleocapsid antibodies. Can you elaborate on that? What tests we are doing? Are they good enough to give a as a security?
See, right now we are practically we are basing our things on ELISA and Camelusence. These are the two basic platforms which are being used as of today, and both of them have their advantages, disadvantages. And I think the best person to answer this actually will be Dr. Gaganti, but nevertheless from the clinical perspective.
Go to her, yeah.
Yeah. But from the clinical perspective, if you really ask me, there is a cross-reactivity which is being seen, especially when the ELISA test, and that is what we are seeing it. In fact, quite a few people who had a positivity and later on not showing that much amount of response probably has been infected with other coronaviruses. If you look at the brochures of ELISA testing which is there, they're already saying it, the cross-reactivity is there. Therefore, false positivity is very high with that. And that is one part. Camelusence is another one. But when both are positive, then we usually take it up that the yes, person has got this, you have a COVID, corona or the SARS-CoV infection. That's the two things which one is looking in terms where we are having asymptomatic even from the convalescent plasma. The neutralizing test against the nucleocapsid and your spike proteins are also available. But the classical test which has been done actually for the Covaxin trial also is available at a very few centers, and especially they are doing it, the Bharat Biotech also is doing with the NIV. So the spike protein NIV testing bases are not available, but yes, of late now on Camelusence platforms, we have started getting the antibody testing against the spike proteins available, but they are pretty expensive. Therefore, in a routine matter, they are not being used as of today.
Dr. Gaganji, would you like to add something? What your comment on antibody response and translating into immunity?
From the data that we have from India, we see that almost 100% of the people who are symptomatic and RT-PCR positive do make an antibody response. With people who have severe disease, up to 100%, the people who have moderate disease, 90% plus, people who have asymptomatic infections are more like 75 to 80% of people making antibodies. How long the antibodies last depends on the assay that is used. The nucleocapsid antibodies directed against the nucleocapsid drop off the quickest. Antibodies to the spike and the receptor binding domain of the spike remain the longest. In terms of the neutralizing antibody responses, what seems to be coming out from the vaccine trials as we look for a correlate of protection is that actually you don't seem to need a lot of neutralizing antibody response to be protected from infection. And initially, when the FDA had put out its guidance for neutralizing antibodies, they had said that they would accept results that were of a titer of greater than 1 in 160. It now appears that the protection may be from a much lower level of antibodies. The WHO has just come out with 3 antibody standards that are being distributed around the world, against which we hope that many people will begin to compare their assays and use these standards so that we have a better head-to-head comparison of how these assays perform. The chemiluminescence assays are better than the ELISA platforms in terms of sensitivity. The issues with false positivity, as Dr. Chaudhary pointed out, are much greater with the nucleocapsid, very little with the spike and the receptor binding domain. So we do have a number of options. Now there are new assays in development which are for the non-structural proteins, and this is going to be very, very important when we think about better characterizing immune responses, particularly when we have people who are vaccinated or reinfected.
What about memory cells? We keep talking about that, cells would have memory and they'll immediately mount a response to vaccine.
Yeah.
So tell us something about.
So memory cells are important but are difficult to measure. So you really need to be able to do good immunophenotyping to be able to assess memory cells. As far as I am aware, there are only a couple of labs in India that have begun to do this with standardized assays. Lots of people play around with trying to measure memory, but if they don't have experience with doing good facts-based studies, then they can wind up with batch effects that lead to great difficulties in interpretation.
So in your wisdom, sorry, please continue.
There's just one thing that I wanted to point out that the ICS should be aware of. That there is a very important study that was done on autopsied individuals who died of SARS-CoV-2. This was published in Cell a couple of months ago. Essentially, what it showed there was that people who had severe disease practically did not have germinal centers in their lymph nodes, which means that they were unable to make a good memory response. So there is something that we need to study about people who go on to develop severe disease in terms of treating immunophenotyping for those individuals very, very differently from the ones that have moderate disease or asymptomatic infections.
Thank you. That was masterly. Sorry, I forgot to tell our viewers who have logged in, please post your questions and we'll certainly have a question answer in the end. And to my eminent panelists, although I'm focusing questions on a particular panelist, but if you have something to add, please come in as you please. That's about it. So now I come to Dr. Panda. If you could unmute yourself. Dr. Panda Simran Panda is an astute epidemiologist and have got vast experience and currently associated with Indian Council of Medical Research and has a big responsibility. So Dr. Panda, we are aware that making a vaccine sometimes average take 10 to 10 years, 8 to 10 years. Dr. Guleria referred to it, and This has been the usual time. And as the vaccine thing came, WHO kept warning, and I remember Dr. Soumya Swaminathan in one of the TV programs that I did with, she said that we expect vaccine in the end of 2021, at best, she said. But we have seen vaccine now. Do you think we have compromised on some safety measures, or because of the emergency, the world has been in a hurry, and is there a word of caution? Dr. Panda.
Good evening, Dr. Khilnani, and I really thank ICAS for this discussion and the opportunity.
Pleasure is ours. Pleasure is ours, please. Thank you.
So this is a question that is bothering scientists to the general population. Everybody is aware of the long time that was being taken for the other vaccines, which have seen the light in the program and have been implemented in the vaccination programs. And this is an extraordinary time. So where the pandemic is ravaging and there are illnesses, post-COVID complications, deaths, an extraordinary time requires extraordinary response. So if we keep that into consideration, the pandemic is staring at us and it is demanding something in terms of our wit, our ability, and our extraordinary response. So what are the responses we are talking about when we discuss vaccine? One is, of course, safety. Safety can be assessed in the phase 1 trial, and if that is assessed and a vaccine does not qualify to be considered as a safe one, it does not move to phase 2. And phase 2 mostly focuses, along with safety, mostly focuses on immunogenicity. So all the vaccines that we have been discussing today and has been so elegantly presented by Dr. Guleria, all of them have actually crossed these paths. And then the saving of time for bringing a vaccine to the final stage of phase 3 has not compromised on these steps at all. So first of all, I want to say in clear terms that there has not been any compromise, and there will be no compromise, not only for India, for every country. I think nobody would like to play with the safety of a vaccine and then put their citizens to risk. The second thing in relation to this that I want to highlight is communication. Communication is the challenge here. Why? Because India, we are in India now, we are talking about Indian necessity needs and keeping the needs of our countrymen in focus. The classical or the robust immunization program that we have in India mostly involves children. And most of the physicians and the healthcare workers who are involved in vaccination programs, they communicate with the parents of the children, not with the children. Or maybe that's a cursory communication. The communication happens mostly with parents, and the parents see this as an insurance for their children against any life-threatening disease that might appear later. But in this particular vaccination program, it would not be directed towards children alone, and it would rather be directed towards adults, and as Dr. Guleria said, adults who are prioritized in certain groups. For example, healthcare workers, frontline workers, people who are not over 50 but have comorbidities, and people who are above 50. So communication in terms of the safety of the vaccines that is going to be administered to adults would require a communication strategy, very well crafted, and community engagement in that communication to happen. So without the community engagement, where adults are going to be the primary recipients at the first phase of the vaccination program, would be critical, where this should be communicated that safety is fine, and that's why the vaccine has moved to the phase 2 and then it's phase 3. Thirdly, how are we then able to reduce the time for bringing the vaccine into practice, program-related practice. So I generally say that there are 3 P's. One P is the product. Here we are talking about the vaccine. The other P is the program, and we want to bring this product to the program. And then the people, and I did talk about the importance of engaging the community and communicating to people in clear terms. So the middle P, which is program, how can we bring this? So there are 2 things. One is the science and the data part of it. And the second is, of course, that is also a science, the approval process and the regulatory authority for each country. So let me focus for the time being on the science part of it. When the phase 3 trial goes on, then the data starts emerging, and our terminology, which common people have also come across, is rolling review. So we do not wait till the end of phase 3 and the classical unblinding and analyzing the data to understand whether a vaccine is efficacious or not.
So Dr. Panda, if I could interrupt you.
Sure.
In your wisdom, you feel that in COVID vaccine rollout and coming up to the community, every precaution in the textbook or the rule book has been taken. That's what you want to say, sir?
Yes, very clearly. And the events are being monitored on a real-time basis so that emergency use authorization can be addressed. So that's the second message I want to give, that it's events which are being very closely monitored. So we need not to wait till the end of phase 3. And that's how the time is being squeezed. Because it's an extraordinary time, we do require these extraordinary approaches.
So message is very loud and clear. Those who have any reservations about the rapid speed with the vaccination has come, it is absolutely safe. All the processes have been followed. All the large phase 3 trials have been conducted. So now I come to the king, Dr. Guleria. Dr. Guleria, please unmute yourself. You had enough rest after your immaculate talk. I had 2 questions for you, and one you have largely answered. One question was, what challenges are expected in rollout of vaccine to the most interior part of the country? You have very graphically and by pictures have answered that, but you could add to that. Other thing which comes to a physician's mind, that do we need to vaccinate people who have already got recent infection? Is it not waste of vaccine, those who are seropositive?
So 2 important questions. The first question, of course, is that we are a very large country and we have both urban and rural area, and many areas are far flung, especially if you look at the northeast and hilly areas of our country. But there has been a lot of preparation that has been done, and like I showed in my presentation, that even our dry run has been done just to make sure that all factors, including distance, including availability of vaccinators at these remote sites, will be available. Therefore, I think a lot of preparation is being done, not only by the central government, but by state governments. And I'm pretty confident that we would be able to roll it out. After all, we've been holding elections for so many years, and we've been really a country which probably has the best record as far as holding elections for such a large population is concerned. Coming to a second point, this is a point which has been debated by many, but the issue is 2. One is to remember that many of us, many individuals will be asymptomatic and will have the infection. We will not be able to pick them up. And there will be others who will not get themselves tested, may have a flu-like syndrome, but will not get them tested and will also have had the infection and will have antibodies. So if we were to say that we test everyone to see whether there are antibodies and then decide on whether whom to vaccinate and whom not to vaccinate, it becomes a real logistic challenge to do all of that, and it doesn't seem to be beneficial. Also, we don't know how long the antibody response lasts. Therefore, it may be worthwhile, and from both these points, logistically and from the point of view of giving some sort of a booster immunity, that even those who had COVID-19 vaccine, whether it be in the distant past or in the near past, that we vaccinate them all, it will make practical sense, and it will also really be more useful. Therefore, I think that is why the plan is to vaccinate everyone who fits into the priority list, rather than first looking for antibodies and see whether they have sufficient antibodies and then deciding whether or not to vaccinate them.
I totally agree with Dr. Kuleria that you can't be looking for antibodies given the intricacies of antibody test, which is described by Dr. Gagandeep. But a person who has had mild or moderate symptomatic infection who is RT-PCR positive, but Dr. Guleria, probably it looks like that there would be some benefit and it will be difficult to choose and give and not to give. And but that question came to mind, so I put it across. So now I come to two experts, Dr. Panda and Dr. Gagandeep. That is one, like the flu vaccine is changes, every 6 monthly, North Hemisphere strain, South Hemisphere strain. We keep changing. Every year we vaccinate our susceptible population. And now UK mutation has come, South African mutation has come, RNA virus is known to mutate. To Dr. Gagandeep, what is your take? How will we be changing vaccine every year, or difficult question for you? And I'll come to Dr. Panda. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Gagandeep.
So with influenza vaccines, we have both antigenic shift and antigenic drift. In coronaviruses, we don't have antigenic shift. We only have antigenic drift, which is the accumulation of mutations. Now, if we look at the new variants that have appeared, we have two variants in the UK strain that might potentially affect the immune response, and three mutations in the South African variant that could affect the immune response in the spike protein. So if the spike changes enough for us to require a new vaccine, we might need to think about that, but I don't think it will happen on the same time scale as influenza.
Okay. Dr. Panda, you want to add something, or we move ahead?
No, Dr. Gagandeep Khan has highlighted the biology part of it. I will just say that the vaccination, not only in prioritized groups, but with desired speed for attaining that coverage, will have the potential to break the chain of transmission by bringing down the reproduction number, as we call it RO or RE, effective reproductive rate, for the viruses. So we don't know what will be required for future.
Thank you.
But it is possible to control with the vaccine, not necessarily the mass vaccination, but smart vaccination.
Now I come to the grassroots workers, Sanjay Rai. Sanjay Rai has been the PI of the AIIMS team which has been conducting this trial. Sanjay, you have waited long enough, you have rested long enough. Tell us about challenges that you face. What problems did you have, and the way forward?
For our vaccine trial?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank Indian Chess Society for giving me this opportunity to participate in this webinar and share this special occasion with all of you. For this Covaxin trial, we all know this is an indigenous vaccine. ICMR isolated the virus, and with the help of Bharat Biotech, they developed this vaccine. So we started a phase 1 trial in July 2020. And then in phase 1 trial, we had 3 formulations, different formulations with different doses and with different adjuvants. Then after this completion of phase 1, now the results of the both phase 1 and phase 2 trials are in the public domain. Based on this, I can say that overall side effects were very minimal, less than 10% in both phase 1 and phase 2. Although the sample size was huge, we recruited around 375 in the phase 1 and 380 in the phase 2, whereas in many other trials, the sample size was less than 50 in phase 1. So sample size was very good, more than 300 sample size in both initially we didn't face any major challenge. Actually, the response was overwhelming. When we advertise for phase 1 clinical trial, usually in phase 1, as we all know, phase 1 clinical trial is mainly for the safety concern. So when we advertised, the requirement was for only 100 volunteers, and we received more than 4,500 applications in 4 days time. Then we stopped recruitment, and then for phase 2 also we received a lot of applications. What we faced here in phase 3 trial, initially for first 10 to 15 days, we faced a lot of challenges, and challenges in terms of refusal. Actually, in phase 1, phase 2 trial, the refusal rate was less than 10%. But initial phase in our phase 3 trial, the refusal rate was very high, almost 70 to 80%. When we asked our participants why you are refusing, they replied that they do not want to participate in the trial. They came here to receive a vaccine. The government of India has already announced that very soon they are going to receive a vaccine. So why to participate in this type of trial? We explained them, but again we advertised. But finally we overcome this problem, and now the response rate is again very good. If you see the initial 15 days, the overall recruitment was 5 to 10 per day. Although we called almost 100 participants, now we are calling 50 to 60 per day, and recruitment is almost 40 to 50. So we have overcome this type of challenges in this. There are few problems. This is not problem. Ethics committee raised a few concerns, and that were very valid concerns. So that delayed some starting our recruitment process. Otherwise, overall, the response was very good from the participants' perspective. It was good, and others administrative perspective was very good.
Thank you.
Dr. Khilnani, sir, may I add here, because we have been also facing the same challenges. In terms of recruitment, I was just talking about.
Okay, tell us.
Yeah. You see, we had in the phase 1 and phase 2, we had a rocking start. Phase 3 also we had a pretty good start, but unfortunately the day our Minister Saab had an issue because he was vaccinated, and within 15 days of that he had it, and suddenly everything dried down. And what Dr. Sanjay has said that it is important. We have done more than 400 vaccinations for the phase 2. The major problem, which I think is the first time in any vaccination trial, it is such a large number for this sort of a public glare, people are participating. So they are coming to you with an anticipation that you are probably injecting the vaccine. I think that bias, we've been taking a lot of time for us to convince people that no, this is a trial, even we don't know. They feel that you know it and you are trying to justify it, you have to give. So I think what he has said is very true, and the same challenge we are facing right now.
Okay, thank you so much. I was coming to you, Dr. Dhruv.
Sir.
You are also involved with this trial, you are involved with the patient care and everything. So what are the adverse effects? There are a lot of fear. Initially for last 6 months we are hearing Bell's palsy, transverse myelitis, neurological problem, long-term adverse effects, of course, pain at the injection site, and all those things. So what is your view on the adverse effects?
Sir, on the adverse effects...
Not only Covaxin, talk in general.
Yeah. I have a little experience now with the Covaxin. First I will talk about it, then otherwise. So most of the time what we have seen is the people who have complained have 3 things. A, headache, which has been there, including lightheadedness. Second is a significant myalgias, which have come up to these patients, and fatigue. And third, a few patients with this have also complained of diarrhea, the volunteers. So I think these are the couple of things which we have seen, and by and large they stay for 48 hours or so and then they disappear. These are the common things which one has seen it. Pain at the local site has been there. That is the commonest one which was there. But by and large we are seeing it is much more in the first vaccine, first shot. As far as when we started giving the second shot, the severity and the significant severity of these symptoms which they had in the first time, it decreased. So that is what we are looking in terms of Covaxin. But in terms of other vaccines which have been coming up there, you see it right now with the Moderna itself, people had near anaphylactic reactions. Similarly, the other protein reactions, the same thing has happened also in your Pfizer also. But we have to be very careful, particularly late or delayed neurological effect, because sometimes molecular mimicry otherwise can cause it. But allergic reactions definitely now in the US and the UK, now they have put a straight away that anybody who has significant allergic reaction or on EpiPen, they should actually avoid these vaccinations as far as possible. So the short answer to your question is anybody who has anaphylactic reactions in the past or have a significant allergy history in the family or themselves, they probably, especially the protein vaccinations, they need to be careful because they're all developing within the lab, and from there they may have a problem.
Dr. Gagandeep, there was one fear, if you could unmute yourself, that this mRNA vaccine may alter the DNA. Can you explain a little bit? At least I don't understand this.
Well, it's impossible for mRNA vaccines to alter DNA because we don't have reverse transcriptase in our cells. mRNA enters into the cytoplasm and stays there. It does not go into the nucleus. So it is not possible to have an integration, first a reverse transcription and then an integration with the genome of the host. So I think one thing that's really important for everyone to emphasize is one of the reasons that we have not had mRNA vaccines up until now is because RNA is a very fragile molecule. It is made to be broken down very quickly. And the reason that we have mRNA vaccines is because we have figured out how to make the lipid nanoparticles that allow us to protect the mRNA long enough to get it inside cells. So we shouldn't worry. mRNA is fragile. mRNA stays in the cytoplasm. There is no reverse transcription.
Thank you so much. It's such a words of wisdom. It sets so many things to rest. We are getting into frenzy that our DNA will alter. I don't know what will happen. Dr. Guleria, 2 questions for you. One, and I left difficult question for you. Which immunity is better? The one you get with infection or the one you get with the vaccine? That is the first question. And I'll recite the second question also. Are there any determinants of good response to vaccination? It may be age, maybe diabetes, maybe immune status, maybe. Is there anything that we know about it?
So I think when the first question that you asked me, that was regarding what is the immune response?
No. 2 persons. One gets vaccine, other gets infection. Okay. Who is more protected?
I would say that the person who gets vaccinated will have a better response because you are now giving him a good immune. The antigen is being given to create a good immune response. As we already said, in disease, we are not really sure what is going to be the response. We have individuals who do not produce that much of antibodies because of the mild antigen response that they may have. And that is why if you look at the spectrum of antibody production among COVID-19, especially mild, moderate and severe disease, the antibody response is very, very variable. And therefore, it is difficult to say how much immunity will the natural disease give. And that is why, like I had said in the past, vaccination for everyone should be done. Regarding who will have a good immune response, I think if your immune system is robust, you will have a good immune response. There was a lot of concern about the elderly, the phenomenon of immunosense. That is, as you age, you have a less robust immune system and you may not be able to produce a good amount of antibodies. This has been an issue with various other vaccines also. There have been certain vaccines where in the elderly people have given double dose or higher dose to induce a good immune response. Whatever data we have from various trials which have used the elderly, which have given vaccination to the elderly, have shown that even in them, they have a good immune response, and therefore that is reassuring. But you have to have a good immune system to create a response, and that is why there has been concern that when we start vaccinating a large number of people, especially those who are severely immunosuppressed, will the protection be as good as among the healthy people? I think that is something that we have to follow up and see. Current data just suggests that it does give some degree of protection as far as this group is also concerned.
Amazing answer. Absolutely to the dot and very clear. Dr. Sanjay, as a community medicine expert, when do you think, by what date we will be able to immunize whole of India? And will it be possible given the sub-center?
It's a very difficult question. One, and really, do we require to immunize the entire population? So the recent study, this NMJ study concluded that natural infection provides better immunity, at least for first 6 to 7 months. India has reported, this is the total number of reported cases, more than 1 crore, more than 10 million reported cases. I don't think that they require vaccination. At least we can defer. Now we have sufficient evidence. And even if you see the last 100 years of our evidences from smallpox, for all respiratory disease, either smallpox or measles or any such type of disease, usually a natural infection as a thumb rule provides better protection than vaccine. See, the efficacy of these two vaccines, either Moderna vaccine or your Pfizer vaccine, is around 95%. Whereas if you see this NAGM publication, where 12,000 healthcare workers were followed for up to 31 weeks in follow-up, and it was seen that about 1,200 people were IgG positive at the baseline, and only 2 became RT-PCR positive. So the overall protection rate, if you see for IgG positive, was more than 99% if you calculate this. So actually we can justify this with our previous experience based on our all respiratory infections, vaccine related. So your question, like you asked about the when will cover. We know we have, as Dr. Guleria mentioned in his presentation also, that more than 28,000 this point cold chain points. We have more than 90,000 equipments in this country. But even for the phase 1, where we are planning to cover 30 crore population, it's not sufficient. For healthcare workers, like 1 crore healthcare workers and 2 crores your frontline workers, this is sufficient. But if you want to cover this entire, then we have to update our system, infrastructure. We don't have such type of infrastructure. So in first 6 months, definitely we are not going to cover the entire population. This is my opinion. But definitely next 6 months of 2021, most probably will be able to.
So, thank you so much. Now I pose a question to all my panelists. I'm not a pessimist as far as the vaccination is concerned, but I have a question. We are not vaccinating children below 18 years. That's what I understand, which makes probably 30-40% of our population. The efficacy of vaccine at best, if you talk about Covaxin, is 50 to 60%, or you may take it 70% if you use Astra vaccine. So if you combine these two, 30% children, 30% not getting immunity. So even if you vaccinate whole of country, you are still leaving 50 to 60% people who are not immune to the disease. How do you take it? Dr. Dhruv, you are a philosopher, I'll come to you.
Very nice, nothing of that sort. But you see, first quick 2 comments. I think I will go more by what Dr. Sanjay Rai has said, and I have, with all humility, will like to differ with Dr. Guleria on the subject of immunity. Natural immunity is natural immunity. That's why you see in the infectious diseases who have been vaccinated, we are seeing him in adults, which we used to see it in the children. I think I would like to stick to the basics of biology, 1. Second is, in terms of, that's the concept of herd immunity. Already, if you look at the data which has come up from within this country, though it is a very small, limited data in the pockets, you look at it coming from Bombay, 2 places, Colaba as well as from Dharavi, nearly 57% in Dharavi, and more than 3/4 people in Colaba has already got antibodies. Therefore, there is an extensive spread which has taken place in this country. But at the same time, the data which you have yourself made a very beautiful commentary and thing on the NAGM 1. it again shows that people who already has a COVID, and you look at it, the neutralizing antibody that is there. I'm giving an example, a very personal example. Somebody close to me had a COVID. After 4 months, we got a neutralizing antibody test that it's still more than 1:180. So I think we need to be careful about what we are looking at it in terms of mass planning. It is fine. Children, probably like influenza, could be a carrier, could be spreading it up. But at the same time, the data which has come up and which is showing up that they are relatively more protected because of the recurrent corona infections and the spike one we are all putting emphasis on S1. And now this is an S2, this is a theoretical thing. Probably Dr. Gagandeep and Dr. Panda can clear on it. They are saying they are having a cross-reactivity. So I'm not unduly perturbed. The only thing is that the powerful biotechnological tools are available to us. And this is a disease which is being, instead of being treated in the labs, is being treated in the TV stations and mass media and has been too much politicized. I think we must stick to the basics, follow the things, and prepare it. I'm not reasonably, I'm not too concerned about
Dr.
it.
Gagandeep, are you worried?
About coverage? Yes.
You are worried about coverage, yes. Are you worried about this UK strain and South African strain as far as vaccination is concerned?
No, I'm not worried about the strains as far as vaccination is concerned at this time, because I think there are enough antigenic epitopes for the current vaccines to protect us. Of course, we will have better data on that emerging from laboratories that are doing this testing over the next 2 to 4 weeks. I am worried about coverage because with all the effort that we have put into childhood immunization, we have never reached over 90%. And here we are talking about an adult immunization program which we have no experience of. So even though we are planning greatly to do this, we are planning to do this with only government infrastructure on top of a routine immunization program that only reaches 90% of children. So I think we need to be a little bit humble about this and make sure that we track things well.
Okay. My worry, madam, is
yes, Dhruv. Yes, Dhruv, please.
My worry is not only about the adult vaccination, how it is going to impact the universal program of immunization. Because
Absolutely.
that is my worry is actually, if you really ask me. But ma'am, the only thing I say is that NACVAC has come with a very smart move of using the election type of a pattern. So that gives them a significant reach to the different, I think whosoever has done needs to be complimented for picking that up, because that ensures your access to a single person if it is properly implemented and monitored as planned.
I agree that using the election machinery is smart. How many people vote in the elections of the electorate?
Okay. That is a separate issue, ma'am.
Exactly.
But that is reaching it. That is an individual choice.
Dr. Gagandeep, if you take a discussion with Dhruv, you will have to have breakfast with him tomorrow morning. He is not going to so that's a line in the lighter vein. Any of my panelists, Dr. Sanjay Rai, Dr. Panda, want to give a final comment? 30 seconds, if you have something earth-shaking to tell. Yes, Dr. Panda, please. Please unmute yourself.
Not a final comment, but I would draw attention to everybody about the science paper, which did look into the infection spread matrix developed from the data collected from Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. And we used that matrix in order to see or address the question that Dr. Khilnani asked. If we have a 60% efficacious vaccine in hand, or we have a vaccine which is 80% efficacious, and with the limited coverage, what would we do? We examined the impact of the vaccine on two counts. One, reduction in the death or fatality, and reduction in the disease transmission. We saw that it is not only the direct effects of vaccination on those who get vaccinated, but the indirect effects would greatly impact on the chain of transmission of the virus. So again, I would say that not that we have to wait for that day when everybody gets vaccinated. The effect will be visible within, we saw even that, within the 3 weeks of vaccination, when it covers the population that have been prioritized. So my final statement would be, we should do this vaccination in the prioritized groups well, and we know that it is not only the direct effect, but the indirect effect will have impact on the viral transmission by breaking the chain of transmission, and the effect will be evident within 3 weeks if it is being done concurrently in all the states. And again, within that 3 weeks time, there will be a serious drop in terms of fatality amongst those who have comorbidity, and of course, we all know that they suffer from asthma.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
it would be important to emphasize that the actual protection will come about 15 days after the booster dose. No one should start roaming around saying that he has got a vaccine, so he's protected. So I have a pleasant duty of we have almost reached the time. We can keep on talking about it, but I need to summarize it for those people who came late. It has been an amazing discussion that we had, the first of its kind as far as the fleet of webinars that we had, and we had a masterly presentation by Dr. Guleria, who actually took us from A to Z, and nobody can do other than him can do it, because he's a clinician par excellence and also a planner. And subsequently, Dr. Gagandeep, expressed depth of her basic knowledge and told us about the vaccines, what type of vaccines are there, how. And I didn't expect her to tell us in 90 seconds, which she did. I thought she'll take at least 5 minutes but she actually did that. And Dhruv, of course, Dr. Dhruv, sorry, I call him Dhruv. So,
no, so that's
Dhruv explained the T cell, B cell, antibodies, and actually took me back to my third semester, which I hardly studied at that time. And he actually taught me, and probably through me everybody, that how the immunity is not only antibodies, it also involves T cell. And Dr. Panda gave a very optimistic view that it's not a hurriedly given vaccine. It is a vaccine which has been properly tested. So don't be scared about it. And of course, Dr. Guleria told us that everybody will be vaccinated well in time. There are not too many challenges, and he felt that the vaccine gives probably better immunity than infection. With Dr. Dhruv gently this time said, no, I don't agree. But that probably the time will tell, and probably we'll never find out. We also discussed about whether the vaccine will have to be changed, like a flu vaccine, which Dr. Gagandeep informed us. But what was most important is that Dr. Gagandeep clearly said that don't be scared that this mRNA vaccine will change the DNA. The fact of the matter is, all physicians are quacks. They don't understand the basics. And coming from Dr. Gagandeep that this mRNA vaccine will not change your DNA, you won't become a chimpanzee from human being. That's what a clinician would understand. Of course, the adverse effects Dr. Dhruv described was very, very enlightening, and he has personal experiences of that malaise and body ache and fever. Nothing beyond that, but neurological problems, if at all they occur during the initial times, one doesn't have to be scared about. And we didn't talk about herd immunity because that's a very difficult thing, but we touched upon it. But possibly, over a period of time, we'll attain herd immunity based on our infection rate, which is very high in, say, Dharavi, and which Dr. Dhruv described, and we would probably reach that over a period of time. It's anybody's guess as to when we would reach. And Dr. Sanjay, as always, he is very candid and very practical and very straightforward, doesn't mince words, and he along with Dr. Gagandeep did have some reservations about this vaccine reaching the most interior part of it. And finally, Dr. Gagandeep also said that don't be scared of UK strain and or South African strain. As a virologist, she knows that these viruses, RNA viruses, keep mutating, and the vaccine efficacy that we are discussing will not be affected by that. My concern was children who would where the vaccine has not been tested. I am sure someday it will occur. With that, I have a pleasant. Before I take the questions, let me see if there are any questions which have been posed, and I don't see any questions coming. That's a little surprising.
नहीं सर आ रहे हैं.
If somebody has got questions, then I will be happy to take it before we conclude the. Dr. Guleria had to leave, so thanks to him that he came despite being so busy, and So where do we?
Sir, the one question, if you permit me, I can read it now. I am seeing it on that. And
Yeah.
I think Dr. Gagandeep will be the right person again to answer it.
Okay, sure.
Sir, this is Sir Dr. Venkatesh Kumar, Tamil Nadu, Namakkal. He has written that vector vaccine sends DNA inside the host nucleus, unlike mRNA. Is it so? They're talking about the DNA viruses, ma'am.
Yes, so DNA vaccines do carry the message on DNA. This is carried on a plasmid, and the plasmid is not capable of integrating with the host chromosome. So again, this is a situation where we don't need to worry. Persistence, the other thing that people worry about also is that DNA is a much more stable molecule than RNA. So people worry that there may be persistence of the DNA, the plasmid DNA within the host. And there have been studies that have looked in animal models and shown that there is no persistence of DNA in the animal model.
कहाँ पर आते हैं questions?
Ma'am, there's another question for you. Dr. Khilnani, if you permit, may I put it?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am, this is Mr. Dr. This is Deepak Shivpuri from Rajasthan, Jaipur. He has asked, if a person is immunosuppressed due to rituximab, is it possible that he may not mount an antibody response for mildly symptomatic disease? For Dr. Kang, they have written very clearly. So it's a question for you.
Well, I'll ask all the clinicians to weigh in as well, but the recommendations that have come out from the American Committee for Immunization Practices for immunocompromised individuals recommend giving the mRNA vaccines, even for people who are on steroids, with the caution that although people who are immunosuppressed and have autoimmunity have been included in phase 3 trials, we at the moment don't have data from them. They have nonetheless recommended the vaccine, but also said that it is likely that these people will mount a lesser immune response.
Ma'am, there is a Ranju Gandhi from Delhi has asked, in light of British guidelines for immunosuppressed pregnant patient children.
Dhruv, just hold on.
Yeah.
So I've got the list of questions.
It's a plenty of them, sir.
Sorry, I didn't know where it was coming.
Webinar.
So Viraj Suvarna, we know him. He's from Mumbai. What if the vaccine has some unpredictable effects on the healthcare workers? The country's healthcare workers could be impacted at one go, and the country will be at risk similarly. If the armed forces are vaccinated. This is a comment, so let's not take it.
विराज के सर 4 questions और हैं.
If a person is immunocompromised, rituximab, is it possible that he may not mount antibody response? Dr. Gagandeep.
No, I just answered that question, sir.
हो गया sir.
Okay, all right. Himachal
one question is there, sir, which if you permit me. This is written, ma'am. If Sputnik V first dose is given first and then AZ AstraZeneca vaccine booster dose or vice versa, will it make any difference?
So actually this is going to be tried in clinical trials, a combination of AstraZeneca and the Sputnik doses. I'd be much more comfortable combining AD26, which is the first dose of the Sputnik vaccine, with 1 dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine rather than the AD5 dose and the AstraZeneca vaccine. I think we will get at least immunogenicity data from this combination study fairly soon. So I don't see an issue with doing that.
So there are some actually aspersions on the part of people are really very worried about. One Indrajit Khurana is asking that those who had hyperinflammatory response to COVID, can they receive vaccine? The answer Dr. Guleria has already given that, although there could be a difference of opinion, but since it is a mass immunization, it will be very difficult to say who has developed a hyperimmune response and who has not developed a hyperimmune response. And
there is another question, sir, which is very interesting. This is again, most of vaccines present severe disease or hospitalization and decrease mortality. But do they reduce transmission from an infected individual to other?
Gagandeep.
Why I'm saying these are the common queries. So you are our vaccine lady, ma'am. So
vaccines are intended to prevent three things. The first and most important is prevention of disease, and that has been the primary outcome for all the phase 3 trials. Now, when we look at prevention of infection, that is feasible, but usually for mucosal pathogens, you don't get a sterilizing immunity, unlike the kind of immunity that you would see for something like measles, where if you're vaccinated, you don't get reinfected. Mostly for mucosal pathogens, infection can happen, but disease will not happen. Nonetheless, there are some interesting signals from the AstraZeneca trials that there may be a reduction in infection as well. This requires ensuring that there is sampling of individuals that are potentially asymptomatic. And in the Covaxin study also, they are planning to do that. Now, the other thing is transmission. And if you can prevent disease but not prevent infection, can you prevent transmission? That can happen if we have a reduced viral load during an infection that follows vaccines. No symptoms, still some shedding, but less shedding will lead to less transmission. That is very likely to happen.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been amazing discussion, very knowledge enhancing for me, and I would like to kudos and thank Dr. Rajadhar, who actually, this light at the end of the tunnel, the name is given by him. It is this webinar is planned by him, and he spoke to me whether I could anchor this very little knowledge of vaccination. I thought, yes, okay, I'll anchor it. I'll learn a lot. And it has been a learning exercise for all of us. The response in terms of questions have been amazing. The Indian Society has stood to its, Indian Chess Society has stood its reputation of imparting knowledge. And I have a pleasant duty of thanking my most eminent panel, starting from Dr. Guleria to Dr. Dhruv Chaudhary, Dr. Gagandeep, and Dr. Sanjay Rai and Dr. Simran Panda, who on their own right are authorities in their own field and actually instilled their wisdom. So if we were in a hall, I'm sure you will give him a round of applause for him, which they deserve. And with that, I have duty of, I have read all the questions. I didn't take it up not in the interest of time. Majority of questions were actually answered over a period of time. So I sort of omitted them. I think we have covered from A to Z in our panel discussion also. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, all the listeners. Without you, this program is nothing. So thank you for your interest. If there are no questions, the presenters is not too happy. So you have sent a lot of questions, and our panelists have answered to the point. So thank you very much, and have a good night, and hope we have a COVID-free life.
Thank you, sir.
Soon enough.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
thank you, everybody.
Dr. Gagandeep.
Thank you, Raja.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay Rai. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Pan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody in the ICS, and thank you very much. Good night and stay safe.
Good night.